Well, hey there, everybody, and welcome to Hogarth's Global Astrology. Know your planets, know yourself. And this video today, sorry, there's been a slight pause. I was catching up doing things with family, which would make me overrun on time, and then I wouldn't have time to do a video, and then it'd be time for a client or to do a collaboration. And then some days I was also as well just tired. So sorry for that slight pause in the production line of the Secrets, Fame, and Infamy series. Now, this one today, I think is really fascinating. Genuinely. And of course I'm slightly biased. Of course I would say that. Yes, my content is fascinating. But no, it's more than that. And what I've looked at today and what I've been looking at recently as well is sort of like some of those more inspirational characters. Because as we know, us YouTubers, we tend to like to focus on the naughty ones, the people that are misbehaving, and those are also as well tend to be also as well, particularly people in the news, is are those people that people want to see videos on them. And that makes absolute sense, and I'm more than happy to continue doing that. But in there I wanted to sprinkle in some very inspirational people. So as many of you will know who are watching this video, you would have seen that I did a video recently on Dolly Parton. And today my video is on Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King. We all know him. We all know him. And what an important figure in history, not just for America, but just as a global figure and a person of immense prominence and promise, whose life, of course, was cut tragically short when he was murdered. And because there is that element there of that secrecy, and I just wanted to discuss a few things about his chart that may not that many people just wouldn't know necessarily. I mean, we're all very familiar with him as a figure, but what I did was I really got stuck into his chart, and I really had a good old dig. Yeah, I had a good dig. And I just looked at certain key things that happened in his life, which help illustrate things like the Mahadasha sequence, which is something that we're gonna talk about today, and the timing of things, and the lordship of things, and why that is important. So let me just make sure my shoulder is not in the way. There we are. There we are. Got a little bit of evening sunshine coming through there. Can you see that? Little bit of evening sunshine. The sun is setting behind me. And his chart, I mean, as you would imagine, it's a remarkable chart. If you're Martin Luther King of the world, you're going to have a very interesting chart. But there are certain things to it, particularly when it came to his sad demise, that I think you will find fascinating. And I mean fascinating and a bit spooky as well. All right, so let's get stuck in. As I select my little evening drink there. Okay, so let's start with the basics as always. And when was Martin Luther King born? So Martin Luther King was born on the 15th of January 1929. And by all accounts that I could find on the internet, he was born at 12 noon. Yeah, so he was born at midday. And as we know already, midday, it tends to be the time when a lot of kind of very prominent public figures are born. Why? It's because in the middle of the day, the sun, which represents the kingdom and authority and things like government and prominence and all that kind of stuff, tends to be in the 10th house around about that time. And the 10th house is a very prominent public house. And of course, we'll cover that in a second. So whenever one is dealing with people that are involved in politics or CEOs or public figures, you can take the time of midday and you'll do pretty well. That will be pretty accurate, because there's a good chance They'll have the sun in either the 9th house, the 10th house, or the 11th house, which are they're very powerful and influential houses. So as usual, you can see his chart behind me. Now I've done his chart up large. As you know, I don't always give everyone the honor of a big chart, because just for some people it's just not worth it. You know, we can just illustrate, or I can talk about those points on the smaller chart, which is also as well what I've done here. And you see I've highlighted certain boxes, and I've highlighted those certain boxes for a reason, and we'll see why in a minute. So here we are. These are the planets. These are the distribution of planets in Martin Luther King's chart. And what I'll do is we'll whip around the houses, and then I'll get into the actual details of what I found most fascinating. So we're going to be talking about his life and certain areas. Many of you viewers, obviously I've done my research, but many of you viewers, as many of you are based in America, you'll probably know even more than I. But I have covered the main milestones, the kind of like the dates that matter. Okay, so as usual, what do we start off with? We start off with the first house. And surprise, surprise, if we look here, his first house, Martin Luther King was an Aries. He was an Aries. Now, as you know, I do Indian Vedic astrology, not tropical astrology. Now, in Western astrology, they would have his ascendant down as a Taurus, but he's not. He's an Aries. What is Aries all about? It's all about pioneering, going forward, forging one's path, blazing a trail for others that can follow on behind. Yeah, so already when we take in those characteristics, that's especially something that Martin Luther King did. But there's more. Here as well, we see that he's got Jupiter in the first house. Now, as you know, any planet in the first house has a big say, yeah, over the personality and stuff like that. So when you've got Jupiter, not only is it Jupiter in the first house, it's Jupiter in Aries. Now, let's remember the planetary friendships, Jupiter, Mars, the sun and the moon, they're all friends, yeah, which means they all do well in each other's signs. Except Mars is technically debilitated in the sign of Cancer, but he's debilitated yet delighted. You know, there are elements where he can still do very well. And then the other friendship group is Saturn, balloon popper, Mercury and Venus, and they all do very well in each other's signs. And they're the earthly signs. They're about practical day-to-day living, communicating, business contracts, relationships, stuff like that. The former group that I mentioned are more to do about inspiration and philosophical ideas, or right versus wrong, etc., stuff like that. So you've got that, and then of course Rahu and Ketu, the nodes of the moon. North node Rahu, gobble gobble, who I call. South node Ketu, who I call snip snip, and they of course set fate and destiny, and they're there in the mix of everything, and they're the rebels. Yeah, they say the nodes of the moon are like armies, you know, and they're very dynamic and they're very unpredictable. Remember that, they're very unpredictable. They always add something, an element of surprise or even shock. Okay, so here with Jupiter in the first house, it's also in the nakshatra of Ashwini, which is the first nakshatra. It's all about speed, innovation, doing things quickly. The Ashwini Kumars they're known as the physician of the gods. They deal with healing, and they're very closely associated with eyesight as well, clear-sightedness. So if we think with Martin Luther King, what did he have? He had a clear vision of how the world could and should be. But also as well, whenever Jupiter is in the first house, it also gets something what is called Digbala. And Digbala means directional strength, which means that planet picks up even more power. So here, the first house, as we all know, as I always say, what's the first house? It deals with the body, the personality, first impressions, how we come across. It also deals with the top of the head. It's very much associated with the intelligence and the mind, the thinking machine. So here you've got Jupiter, Guru, who is the natural teacher, the philosopher, the preacher. Yeah, the preacher in the first house, in the body. And what Jupiter does when he's in the first house, it can give a person a more of a rotund or robust physique. It tends to make, because Jupiter is what, a big round planet. So say for example, when Jupiter's in the first house, weight gain and stuff like that can be a bit of an issue because he wants to what, expand. But he doesn't just do that. He gives gravitas, expansion in general, gives optimism as well. Jupiter is a very optimistic planet. And he's almost always optimistic as long as he's not in the sign of Capricorn, which is his sign of debilitation. That's the only sign really that can dampen Jupiter's enthusiasm, as it were. Gemini can sometimes be a little bit tricky. I would say Virgo is trickier. And even Libra can cause a few problems. But if he's, but when he's in a fire sign, he's going to do extremely well, because he rules Sagittarius, but he also rules Pisces. And so that's also about idealism as well. So we can see here with Jupiter in the first house strong, in the sign of Aries, which is also about the engineer, innovation. It can also be about surgery. It's about strategy as well, because we need to remember Mars, it means Mars is the ruler of the chart, because this is Aries, so it means Mars is the ruler of the chart, and wherever Mars goes, it's going to have a dynamic, that house is going to become very dynamic, and it's going to become very important because the chart ruler is there. So there's that. So we're dealing already with someone, as we know, that was very optimistic, ebullient, positive, innovative, wanting to go forward, make changes in the world, strategizing, but also as well, let us not forget, Mars is also a planet of what? War, conflict, arguments, agitation, violence. Yeah, it can even represent guns and knives as well, guns and knives. Now, obviously, these things weren't associated with Martin Luther King personally. His father was a preacher, as many of you will know. And really, essentially, Martin Luther King went on to become a preacher himself. But because his Jupiter was so strong, the way he dealt with conflict, he was very much inspired by Gandhi's peaceful protest. So that was a big thing as well. And when Jupiter is strong, a person will seek more peaceful means or more philosophical means for ways of resolving their arguments. So when we look here, we have a person who has a very strong ethic, because Jupiter can also represent ethics as well, and it's doing very well in a fire sign, and it's also got directional strength. Digbala, very intelligent. Even the papers that he wrote, his headmasters and stuff were like, wow, this guy has got it. He is a leader, a pioneer. And I'll read for you the first house. What have I put here? Jupiter adds weight and gravitas. In Aries, he's very powerful and almost warlike, as I said. So Ashwini deals with speed and innovation and powerful and dynamic personality. However, Chiron, the wounded healer. Now, many of you will have seen my Chiron video by now, and you see how I've been just kind of week by week just building it up. And we all know what is Chiron, the wounded healer. Without fail, wherever Chiron is, there will be some kind of wound in that area that is inflicted by self or others, or someone's trying to heal that wound on behalf of someone else or others as well. It's not either. Sometimes it's both, or it could be either or. Now you'll see here, look, Chiron is in the first house for Martin Luther King, and the first house is the body. Yeah, just remember that, the body. Wounded healer in the first house, in the body. All right. So let's move to the second house. So I've put here Rahu exalted plus Mars. Now the nodes of the moon, now there is debate about where the nodes of the moon are exalted. So if we look, here we are. Here are where the nodes of the moon, this is where they actually are today, actually. How interesting, yeah, because they're in the signs of sidereal Taurus and sidereal Scorpio. And maybe that's part, now that I'm doing this, I'm thinking like, oh, maybe that's why I want to do Martin Luther King. There's often that parallel there. So there's that. And Rahu, by many, is considered exalted in the sense of his most powerful and most benevolent when he's in Taurus. And likewise as well for Ketu, when Ketu is in Scorpio. So this is very powerful. This is very powerful. But if we look here, now apart from Pluto and Neptune, which don't really kind of count in this, the embodied planets. So we need to remember the embodied planets, the planets that literally represent people. So that is Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, that is Venus, that is Mercury, that is also the moon and the sun. Yeah, they represent people. You'll notice here, look at this, Kala Sarpa Yoga. If we look here, all the planets are one side of the moon. Yeah, all the embodied planets. Because if you look here, Mars is with Rahu, and then we go Jupiter, Moon, Venus, Mercury, Sun, Saturn. Neptune and Pluto, they don't count. They're outer planets. They're not necessarily embodied planets. They're still extremely powerful, but they don't necessarily represent people. They can represent states of mind or society as a whole. Yeah. So as those of you who have been watching my videos for a while now, Kala Sarpa Yoga means what? Extremes. Extremes of fate and fortune. It means the life can have sudden ups and downs. It means one can arrive at extreme prominence and then have a spectacular downfall. Yeah, that is the catch of the Kala Sarpa Yoga. But often with the downfall, the person bounces up to a higher level. But it does lead for a very, very eventful life, which of course makes sense with Martin Luther King. So anyway, going back to the second house. So Rahu exalted Mars in Taurus in the house of family, education, and the voice. Mars adds passion and drive. Rahu adds expansion, distinctiveness, and beauty. Yeah. Rahu actually has quite a lot to do with beauty, believe it or not. Even though Rahu is a malefic, Rahu does give beauty. So if we see here, and beauty as in Taurus in his exaltation point. So Martin Luther King had an irresistible voice of immense charisma. Rahu can add charisma and dynamics to the voice. What he does is, because remember, Rahu is what? Gobble gobble, yeah? He is a head without a body. So when Rahu's in the second house, that can certainly create a talker, yeah? Someone that can talk a lot. But it's not just empty talking per se. It's a speech that comes with intelligence. Rahu also represents intelligence as well. But Rahu also represents exotic things, unusual things. So what Rahu will do is, when he's in the second house, he will make the face distinctive in some kind of way, because the second house also deals with the face. Taurus is from the eyebrows down to the neck. This is Taurus. All the senses, the main senses, are here. So Taurus deals with the senses, also deals with the teeth, the eyes, the eyesight, and of course, like I said, the voice. So here you have someone who's got Mars in the second house, which adds passion, energy, but also as well, Mars is retrograde in the chart as well, which means it was closer to the Earth at the time that he was born, which strengthens that Mars actually, but also it adds a bit of karma to that Mars as well. There might be some regrets there and stuff like that. So what this does is, when you combine that together, it creates what? Very bold, charismatic, and dynamic speech. Because here you have the warrior in the second house, and let's not also forget that it's also the chart ruler. So here we've got the ruler of the first goes into the second. So that means Mars is bringing all of his martial power into the voice and into education. This is so much of what Martin Luther King was passionate about, wasn't he, Mars? Is passion. But also as well, it shows how how his calls to action had gravitas and weight, because you had Mars adding this energy there, the energy of the general, so the rally cry. And then you had Rahu acting in this expansive way. Remember the nodes of the moon exaggerate things. Even Ketu can blow things up. Even though Ketu is almost like an internal explosion or something internal that then explodes out, Rahu is very expansive anyway. So here it gave breadth and depth, gravitas, charisma, both these planets working together, charisma, to that voice that just carried and resounded. And once you've heard Martin Luther King, it is a voice that you cannot forget. Yeah, so you can see that there in his chart. All right, and then we go around and we look at Pluto. What have I written here? So Pluto in the 3rd house of practical education and communication. Pluto is the planet of transformation, and it's in the nakshatra of Purnavasu, which means return of the light. And so here I've put here, he transforms people, because remember Pluto is the planet of what? Death, resurrection, transformation, dark night of the soul, intensity, power, energy. Again, energy represents nuclear power, but also as well, Pluto in the shadow can represent dictatorship or dark power. But Pluto in the positive represents transcendence, transformation. So I've put here, and it's in Return of the Night, the nakshatra. So he transformed people via his speech and communication to give people hope for a better life, because Purnavasu, that nakshatra, that star cluster, means precisely that. Return of the light. It's in Gemini. So here it is in sidereal Gemini. And it's in this sort of section here, and it comes after the middle portion of Gemini, which deals with Ardra. Now remember, Ardra is one of the most destructive nakshatras out there, along with Mula. Yeah, Ardra and Mula. Just remember that this axis here of Gemini and Sagittarius, that is when some of the most intense things in the world have happened here on planet Earth, including the pandemic that we had recently. That happened when the nodes of the moon were in Ardra and Mula. We had September the 11th before that, and then before that we had the AIDS virus. Then before that, things like the assassination of John F. Kennedy, then the bombing of Hiroshima. On and on and on. The nodes cause a lot of stuff to happen. That's why they're associated with fate and destiny, and they're shadows, but they're extremely powerful. So here we've got this Pluto in the house of speech, communications. It also deals with siblings, but it also deals with travel. All sorts of distances, but it also deals with coaches and aeroplanes and cars, the 4th house is vehicles per se, the actual purchasing of a vehicle or the object of a vehicle. But the 3rd house is all of that travel. But also as well, what is Gemini? We all know it is the sign of communication. And because Martin Luther King has an Aries ascendant, his chart just follows in the natural order of the zodiac. Yeah, the natural order. So here we've got this person who's not only has a dynamic personality with a charismatic voice, he also has the power of transformational speech that is intergenerational. Remember as well, Pluto is the slowest moving planet. So the slower moving planets, the outer planets, they affect the generations. So here we could see he was a man of his time in terms of coming to speak, and we still remember his words to this day. The 4th house, nothing going on there. We can skip that. It doesn't mean it's not relevant. It's just that, it's just a settled house. It's not one way or the other. Now, if we look here, the 5th house, and you'll see here, we've got Neptune here, Neptune. And you notice I put the star in. And what's that star? Regulus. All right, 5th house. So Neptune conjunct Regulus in Marga. Now, Marga Nakshatra is the beginning part of Leo, and it is the part that is associated with the throne. Yeah, if we imagine it as a kingdom, this is where the king or the queen wins their throne. And Marga, the deities associated with Marga, are the peat trees, which are the ancestors. So anyone who's got a planet in Marga, they've got some legacy to the ancestors to fulfill. There's something there that they need to carry on, that some of the ancestors carry on the work that some ancestors were not able to complete. And one can certainly make that case for Martin Luther King, particularly about, liberation and, helping people with the civil rights movement. So here, I'll just read this. So Neptune conjunct Regulus in Marga. He was a leader that was able to break down barriers between people. Now we need to remember Neptune, even though he can be a bit of a sketchy planet, he is a sketchy planet, but he does have his virtues. And what he does is he breaks down the barrier between the three-dimensional world and the realms beyond. Yeah, he's about the collective. Neptune breaks down the barriers. This is why, remember as well, Neptune as well is very closely associated with music. What is the universal thing that unites all of humanity? Even when you see little kids, playing when they're growing, music, yeah, speech, narrative, voice, dreams, yeah, dreams. So here, so he was a leader that was able to break down barriers between people and speak with the authority of a king, yeah, because this is in Marga. And Marga goes from basically 4.4 degrees 50 minutes to 6 degrees 4 minutes of sidereal Leo. And what we need to remember is an orb of 3 degrees with a star. 2 obviously is, is ideal, but 3 still counts. And you see his you can't see, I'm saying for you, his Neptune is at 8 degrees 2 minutes. Yeah, so it's in that 2 degree orb. So that's a hit. Yeah, that is a hit. So that gives authority and gravitas to that planet and that area of life. And this is happening in the 5th house. And that the 5th house is what? Giving advice and counsel to others. It's associated with Leo because it's the 5th sign and he's following the natural order of the zodiac. So this Neptune has extra oomph to it, extra oomph. So yeah, so speaking with the authority of a king to huge swathes of people, but with a supernatural power that still echoes today. Spiritual counsel and advice to others. Yeah, Neptune is a very spiritual planet. So here, when he was speaking, it was if he was speaking to everyone, speaking to the world, speaking to the collective unconscious. And you can imagine that is immensely powerful. So we see here 1, 2, 3. His first 3 houses are very dynamic. And then the house of intelligence, speech, giving advice to others, divine downloads. It also deals with astrology as well, and magic, even the 5th house. And Neptune can be a very magical planet, but particularly when it's conjunct Regulus, which is in the heart of the lion. So there was this leader, this charismatic leader that was just able to speak in such a way that it would permeate all of society. And we still talk about Martin Luther King today. Neptune is associated, like I said, with what? It's associated with fog, illusions, but it's also, it deals with spirituality and dreams. What's his most famous thing that he said? I have a dream. And then he spoke about, and that's stuck in everybody's mind. So there's that. And he also, of course, went on to win the Nobel Peace Prize as well. So we'll look at that for the timing. Right, let's move on to the next place. So here we're talking about the 8th house. Now, you know this one, house of sex, death, and rock and roll. So any planets in the 8th house are going to have a big impact. So if we look here, so I'll put here, Ketu exalted in the 8th house. He had exceptional intuitive gifts to the extent he could intuit and read his nation and bring about huge transformations in society because, of course, the 8th house is a house of transformation. He likely had no fear of death and may have prophesied his own demise. Now, I wrote that in before, and then I went into more depths of research. And he basically, on the day, I think it was, which was the day of his demise, where he was shot on his second floor balcony at 6:05 p.m. on Thursday, the 4th of April, 1968. And I've cast the chart for that day. It is uncanny, but we'll get there. And one of the things he said, where is it? I wrote down the end of what he said in his speech. Where is it? I did write it down. Where is it? Trying to organize protests. Where were we? There was something that he said. And what did he say? Oh, that's it. I've got it here at the top. And the last of his sentence was, he said, "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming Lord." And there was a much longer bit before that. So if you think this is a man of exceptional vision, Neptune is spirituality and also supernatural experiences. So for someone to say, "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming Lord," do you know what I mean? That is epic. And then, bang, he was shot dead. Tragic, absolutely awful, and one of the worst crimes in the world. And I think it was a young Jesse James was actually talking to him. So basically, in July of 1968, a fugitive called James Earl Ray was extradited from the UK to stand trial for the killing of Martin Luther King. And he agreed to a controversial plea bargain and was sentenced to 99 years in prison, where he died in 1998. Yeah, so after 30 years. James apparently recanted his confession, and the King family supported reopening an investigation into the shooting. Isn't that interesting? Now, I might pull some tarot on that, actually, to see at the end of this, to see what might be going on there. At the time, King was trying to organize a protest against poverty, and he'd become outspoken as an opponent of the Vietnam War. Yeah, a lot of people at that time were having issues with Vietnam, with Nam. Now, the thing is, lots of people spoke out about Vietnam, but when you're someone like Martin Luther King, people listen. And when someone is an inspirational figure, a dynamic figure, wanting the world to be better, end poverty, even like with Diana, stop landmines, yeah? Then what happens is we need to think. Let's think about Pluto as well. Pluto also represents dark money, yeah? Dark money, clandestine figures, murder, traumas, sexual abuse, things like explosions, dark or evil plans, people trafficking, all the worst that humanity can do. That can be an element of Pluto as well, but he does have his good sides. It's up to us what we choose. This is how we exercise our free will. But when inspirational figures touch on the grounds, particularly on the grounds of war, yeah, because remember, a lot of people make a lot of money from war, and a lot of political things are justified on the back of war. It can make one a lot of enemies. Yeah, makes one very powerful enemies. And I remember when Princess Diana was talking about landmines and stuff like that, and practically got landmines banned overnight. My sister and I looked at each other and we were just like, whoa, she might not be around for very long. Yeah, because there are dark forces in the world. Let's not sugarcoat it. So there's that element there. So, I wasn't actually going to divulge all that part quite so soon, but I just felt with that Neptune there, being able to provide that inspiration and talk to so many people, that when you start speaking out about these larger things as well, it does create a lot of enemies, because many people, as we've seen in modern life, are very invested in things staying exactly as they are because it suits them. Yeah, not the world, suits them. And they're prepared to get rid of people that are going to change that status quo because it means they won't be in power anymore. Yeah, We see that today with all the corruption, and we've even got the Pandora's box of papers, which really wasn't a shock to everyone because we know all these people were crooked and just siphoning off money to various different things anyway. But that's what we're talking about. That dark money, those people that are at the top of the pyramid that want to stay at the top of the pyramid are highly invested in the status quo being maintained because it makes them richer and everyone else poorer, which is what they want. Yeah, those types of people. Any road, right? But here with Ketu in the 8th house, it gives one exceptional intuition. Ketu is a very intuitive planet anyway. He is the planet of scrutiny. He is the planet of being a geek, being almost obsessed with something, with a particular subject matter. He also deals with mathematics. He deals with spirituality, moksha, which means leaving this world. So people who have Ketu in the 8th house, they tend not to fear death because they understand that death is an illusion. Yeah, death is an illusion, that we're here, we're spiritual creatures having a human experience. And very much, I think, King prophesied, that essentially be taken out. And I think on the day or maybe a few days before he made this, he said, because I've had this vision, he's like, I'm not worried anymore. I'm not worried about being hurt anymore, about anything. I fear no one. Yeah. And that's normally what happens when someone says that before they get shot, and the universe is like, all right, you're ready to go now. Bang. Now, that might seem like an oversimplification, but when you see the chart that I cast for the day, you're going to be like, oh my goodness. And that's when I'm going to use the smaller chart with a larger chart to explain. But essentially, a person with Ketu in the 8th house, they don't have a fear of death because they know it's a transition. And in a way, when one doesn't fear death, you can be what? Free. Yeah, you can be free. Anyway, if we move here to the 9th house, Saturn in Sagittarius, but it's in the sign of Mula. Yeah, remember I said Ardra and Mula are very destructive and transformative parts of the sky. So here, so in Mula, shows great gravitas in terms of the law. He toyed with the idea of being a lawyer. Yeah, he almost wanted to be a lawyer. Became a preacher. But Mula means revolution and to tear things up by the roots. So he certainly did that to create healing. Mula is also associated with healing, but it's about tearing up. Mula is about tearing up what doesn't work. What is Saturn? Saturn represents what? The establishment, rules, regulations, government. He fought against the rules and regulations, because when I was just reading up in it, just to remind myself, we need to understand before the civil rights movement, if you are an African American in America, particularly in the South, if you were traveling on the bus, white sat at the front, black sat at the back. But if we think of Rosa Parks, for example, which is one of the figureheads of this, there was actually a woman whose name escapes me that refused to give up her seat like Rosa Parks before. She was 15, but she was pregnant at the time, and she wasn't considered a moral role model. Yeah, remember this was back in the 50s, so that was a big taboo. Anyway, so Rosa Parks famously, the front portion of the white section of the bus was filled up, so the driver said, right, you're gonna have to give up your seats, and 2 people complied, but Rosa Parks didn't. Anyway, she was arrested and she had to pay a fine, and of course that started the whole thing with the, what was it called, let me just hear, yes, the Montgomery bus boycott, which went from the December 5th 1955 to December 20th, 1956. Yeah. And one of the chief organizers for that was Martin Luther King. And that's where he basically came of age. He came of age, even though he was still very young. Yeah. So he was only in his 20s, mid-20s. But he came of age. But here we can see, going back, what is the 9th house? The 9th house also deals with what? The father. It's in the sign of Sagittarius, which is what? Religion, the law, seeking the truth. His father was a preacher, and also what? Very strict. Yeah, one could well imagine. In the end, Martin Luther King ultimately didn't follow the exact footsteps of his father, although he did become a preacher as well. But he felt that some of the speeches, the sermons that were being given in the black churches were overly emotional. Now remember, what is Saturn? Saturn is a cold, dry planet. Saturn's very rational, very practical. So anytime that a person has got their Saturn in the sign of Sagittarius, they are very passionate about politics and the law and, you know, all of that stuff, right and wrong, righteousness, etc. But they're not, Saturn calms it down a bit. They don't froth at the mouth, yeah, as many do, because there's a coolness there, a pragmatism there. And we can see there that Martin Luther King did have that cool, calm, and collected pragmatism. He was unflappable. He was able to stand there in front of the masses and just deliver, yeah, without getting lost in his speech, without getting overexcited, but speaking with this gravitas, this groundedness. And this is what Saturn can do. Saturn is a very heavy planet, but he's like ballast. Saturn, you know, think of things. We weigh something down so it doesn't blow away in the wind. Saturn can be like that. That's one of his virtues. Many people are like, oh, Saturn, blah, blah, blah. No, we need the brakes in the car so the car doesn't career off the ravine. We need to weigh things down sometimes so that it doesn't blow away in the wind, so that we can appreciate that thing. But Saturn can also represent things that are stuck, outmoded, and need to change. And here he is in the dynamic sign of Sagittarius, of belief. So here Saturn is prepared, because Saturn represents traditions. Saturn here is prepared to change up things, takes on a fiery nature, but in more modest and practical ways. So you can imagine with all of these dynamics going on here, wow, this is a combination. But look, let's look at his 10th house. So here we are, Sun in the 10th. Surprise, surprise. So here, Sun in the 10th with Mercury in the highest house of the public. And it's in Uttara Ashada, which is all about righteousness. The Ashadas are all about righteousness and truth. And Mercury in Shravana. Now, Shravana Nakshatra is the symbol of it is the ear. And it's about being able to listen to God, spirituality. So here we see, shows the ability to hear God. This was a potent combination in the sign of government. Yeah, remember Capricorn is the sign of governments and distribution, top-down structures and hierarchy. He shook the foundations of the world, because Capricorn is government, but it's top-down structures. It's the pyramid. It's the pyramid. It's where people want to stay in control. So if we think in terms of, well, it's so relevant now, isn't it, when we think of things like white supremacy, etc. But back then, that was, you know, the dominant. It was part of the law. You know, people were segregated. Hierarchy, structures. Remember, Saturn is a planet of separation, boundaries, borders. So here, Martin Luther King was here to shake that stuff up with his what? With his passionate oratory. But here you can see his son was here as well, which is the kingdom. So here he understood those hierarchies, those structures, but wanted to bring education and illumination there because he could hear the voice of God. I had a dream. You know, as he said, mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming Lord. Shravana. Mercury is the planet of communication. He communicated his divine vision to the world and shared it in the collective to create dynamic change in government structures. He got a lot done, but it also made him a lot of very powerful enemies. It also shows as well that the father was prominent. Yeah, his father was a well-respected preacher. Mercury is showing that ability to communicate as well. This is actually quite a common yoga because Mercury and Venus orbit very close to the sun. So, but actually his Mercury is not combust, and Mercury is very strong in the signs of Capricorn and Aquarius, which belong to his friend Saturn. Yeah, not so good for the sun though. It can affect the life force. Can affect the life force. The sun is the life force. So whenever you see the sun in Capricorn or Aquarius, it can show sometimes in a person's life they can have these episodes or the threat to the life force in some kind of way, because Saturn does not like the sun. Yeah, but he's neutral to Jupiter. Saturn can actually do very well in the sign of Sagittarius, can do very well, because there's no conflict there. They're not enemies. They're polite to one another. Anyway, I digress. Let's go on to the 11th house. So 11th house. So Venus is strong in Aquarius. That's what I've written here. In the sign of Shatabishak. Now, Shatabishak, I know these names sound so funny, don't they? Shatabishak is the sign, is the nakshatra of 1,000 healers or 100 healers or 1,000 lotuses, whatever. It deals with humanity and it deals with healing, but diseases that are difficult to cure. Yeah, difficult to cure. Now, Venus, now she's associated with wealth, luxury, vehicles, the good life, food, wine, etc. Yes, this is true. But guess what? Venus is also known as the nurse of the zodiac. She's also the sign of rejuvenation. And here we've got Venus wanting to what? Rejuvenate in Shatabishak, which is the 1,000 healers. Here he wanted to stand forward and rejuvenate all of society to help humanity and the lives of Black people in particular. But he always spoke about everyone. Do you remember he said, I have a dream that a man will be judged by the content of his character, not the color of his skin. Yeah. One of the other names for Aquarius, because it's in Aquarius, is the sign of other people's children, means the children of the world, humanity at large. And he's got his Venus right there. And Venus is also beauty. So this beautiful vision for humanity. And look, it's also there with the moon. Now, it's not so great for the moon to be in Aquarius, but it's better than it being in Capricorn. But here, the moon is the mothering principle, and it's here in Aquarius, which is, again, other people's children. So here, it doesn't actually impede the nurturing qualities of the moon. What it does, though, it does improve the intelligence of the moon. Aquarius is a very intelligent sign, so is Gemini. So anytime a person, you see this combination, Gemini and Aquarius, you know you're dealing with someone very clever, because it means the processing power of their mind is very quick. They can take on and retain a lot of information. Aquarius is also a very cold sign. Yeah, it can be aloof. Aquarius can be aloof because it is ruled by Saturn. And if you think of Saturn's rings, yeah, Saturn is cold and dry. But sometimes we need that aloofness, that coolness, in order to be able to assess things properly. Because what happens when our emotions get involved with things too much? What? The thinking goes out the window. We can't think straight. And this is why they say never make a key decision when either you're exceedingly happy or very upset or hungry. Yeah. It's just not a good time. Or when you're waking up in the morning, you know, something like that. I remember today I had to get a card cancelled because there was something I suspected that could have been fraud. Anyway, I quickly got it sorted out, car cancelled before even any money could be taken. But the point is, it was in the morning. I wasn't awake. I shouldn't have, I wasn't fully focused. I needed my coffee. Anyway, so here, this is where the moon here steps back. But also as well, remember the moon represents the masses. So he's got the moon in Aquarius. That means talking to lots of people, everyone, the whole world. Yeah. So, and there it is in the 11th house. So you've got, and again, which is again, friends, associations. It's about organizations of all kinds, guilds, embassies. It's very international. Also as well, what happened, Martin Luther King won the Peace Prize. Yeah, so we'll talk about that. And finally, let's go to the 12th house. Let me just make sure I've not missed off anything. So here, so Venus is strong in Aquarius in the sign of Shati Bishak, 1,000 healers, shows that he wanted to cure injustice. But the moon in Purva Bhadrapada, so Purva Bhadrapada is the funeral cot, yeah? Front legs of the funeral cot. The Bhadrapadas are about the funeral cot. They are about divine inspirations, but the funeral cot. So here we see, yeah, things starting to go on. And then we get to the 12th house here. So the 12th house, so Uranus, which is traumas, sudden shocks and surprises, is in the house of hidden enemies in Uttara Bhadrapada, which is the back legs of the funeral cot. Yeah, and hearing the Jaws music here. Yeah. So it gives clues to his shocking assassination. There would have been a deep betrayal there. 12th house is hidden enemies. When Dr. King was in Memphis, he was getting death threats. And it wasn't the first attempt on his life. So I thought I'd share this with you. Now, remember, casting the mind back to December 5th, 1955 to December 20th, 1956. Yeah, so this was a year of the bus strike, yeah, where it was the boycott. So it was that non-violent protest that brought him to prominence. Now, what happened here is that King, let's just say Dr. King, was at the end of his Saturn-Jupiter Mahadasha. Now remember, the Mahadasha is like your soul getting in the back seat of the car. So he was in Saturn's car. But he was right in that transition because his Saturn-Jupiter went up and then changed over to Mercury on the 22nd of the 12th, 1955. So remember, he led, he was one of the chief organizers of this on December 5th. So if we think, that's, just over 2 weeks before he went into his Mercury Mahadasha, because remember, the energy comes in. But what's Mercury? Communication. This was one of the most dynamic times of communication in Dr. King's life. Where is Mercury? Mercury sits in the 10th house of what? Prominence, the public eye, the house of pressure. So we can see he literally came of age at the end of Saturn-Jupiter. Now, Saturn-Jupiter is a very special time because Saturn is hard work. Jupiter is opportunities. So very often there is this sweet, at the end of what is often a very difficult period, you get this sweetie wrapper at the end of the Saturn Mahadasha, which is Saturn-Jupiter, where a person can reach some kind of intellectual and spiritual maturity in their life and then go forth and communicate that message, which is Mercury. So for Martin Luther King, that started, young in his 20s, but it lines up exactly, pretty much. So he's in his Mercury Mahadasha. Mercury is in the 10th house. But is also the lord of the 3rd house, which is communication, and it's lord of the 6th house, which is enemies, health, etc. And it goes to the 10th house, which is career. So here we can see this communication to the masses, but there's also as well, there is that threat of the enemies. Yeah, it activates the enemies, conflict via his speech. So like I said, it wasn't the first attempt on his life. Oh my gosh, look, the time is whizzing by already. So here we are. He survived an assassination attempt in 1958 by a deranged woman called Isola Ware Curry, who stabbed him in the chest at a book signing on September the 20th, 1958. And that was when he was in his Mercury Ketu. Now, what do I'm always saying about Ketu? Ketu is what? Snip, snip. But Ketu is also sharp objects. Deals with knives, razor blades. She tried to cut him with a letter opener. That's what she tried to kill him with. Now, obviously, he survived, and obviously, Dr. King carried on because he doesn't have a fear of death. Yeah, many people would have been like, not sure about my public life anymore. Someone tried to kill me. And many people would accept that and go, you know what? I don't blame you. Dr. King brushed it off. Yeah, brushed it off. And what I've done is, here in orange, now I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see that, maybe you can. In orange, I've actually put in where the planets were at that time of that stabbing, yeah? And what I found fascinating, that Mars, remember Mars also deals with what? Explosions, gunshots, sharp objects, knives as well. At that time, on that day, Mars, which is the 8th lord for an Aries ascendant, look, first house, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, Scorpio, 8th house, sex, death, and rock and roll. So let's not forget that. For the Aries ascendant, Mars is not, even though he's the chart ruler, is not the easiest planet, because he rules the 8th house. You know, that's not an easy house, particularly for a planet that is so associated with conflict and stuff like that. So anyway, we see him transiting Mars on that day was right on top of his Rahu, which is what? Tumble dryer, sudden shocks and surprises. Mars is also the 8th lord. And so here, his natal Rahu was at 5 degrees 46 minutes. And on that day, Mars was at 6 degrees 34 minutes. Wow, in a degree. Yeah, it was right on top. And that can be this is a very powerful and dynamic combination. Rahu with Mars can be very unpredictable, but it's very dynamic. But on that day, that was there. Also as well, in his 4th house, Uranus was there, sudden shocks and surprises, yeah, in the homeland. Here as well, we had Pluto, Venus, and Mercury right on top of each other with Neptune. Now, Neptune is known as the great dissolver, can dissolve things. Neptune is responsible for a lot of end of life. I mean, a lot. Yeah? It's the great dissolver. He acts a bit like Ketu, separates us from this world, which can mean death, or it can be escape via drugs or movies or gaming, stuff like that. So Pluto and all that was all together in his house there. We also as well had the Sun and Rahu in the 6th house of enemies. Also as well, Neptune, transiting Neptune and Jupiter in the 7th house, which is the public, other people. So there was this dissolving quality. Also as well, Jupiter with Neptune can be very delusional. This lady was delusional. And there was Saturn was in the 8th house. Now, ironically, you would think, oh God, balloon popper in the 8th house, blah, blah, blah. But remember, Saturn slows things down. Saturn is the 8th house is also known as the house of longevity. It deals with the life force, how long the life is. The irony is Saturn, transiting Saturn, would have preserved his life because he provided a boundary, a barrier, slowed down the death aspect, the sudden shocks and surprises. So although Saturn gets a bad rap, let me tell you, he is a planet of profound gifts. When he works for you, it can be really profound. And I think it was transiting Saturn that prevented King dying on that day. Yeah, I think it was Saturn that saved him. Particularly as well as it is also the 10th Lord and the 11th Lord. So he was in a public space, you know, and it's like Saturn being in the 8th prevented that death, yeah, in that public space. And also as well, what was really interesting, transiting Chiron was in the 10th house. Remember, Chiron is wounds. 10th house is what? Public career. He was at book signing, yeah, with Mercury, you know, natal Mercury, again, communication, speech, etc. So there was that. And there was Ketu was there in his 12th house, almost doing a snip. So Ketu almost got his way, almost created this moksha moment where Dr. King almost left his body. And he was in Mercury Ketu. So Ketu was trying to give him a moksha moment at that point, and pretty much Saturn managed to stop it. Yeah. So there's that. But let's go to the day of the sad death or murder, shall we say, of Dr. Martin Luther King. Now, he was killed, like I said, on the 6:05 p.m., Thursday, April the 4th, 1968, on his balcony while a young Jesse Jackson was actually having a chat with him. Can you imagine? That's pretty traumatic, yeah? Just seeing that, witnessing that. So I cast a chart for that day, and it is uncanny. So what I did was I cast a chart for that day, and I put the planets in red where they were at that time. Now, we've got to remember, what is the first house? The first house represents the body. The sixth house is what? Enemies. Yeah, enemies. It's about overcoming obstacles, etc. Can deal with health, but it deals with enemies, litigation. People are out to get you. The 12th house is what? Endings. Yeah, endings, beginnings and endings. But that's what it's mainly known for. Escape and moksha. And what's the 8th house? Sex, death and rock and roll. So even though the 8th house deals with longevity, it deals with death as well, particularly sudden deaths. Yeah, things that are shocking or surprising. So looky here. What I've done is, on that day, so here the D1, which is where the planets were sidereally when he was born, and the D9, yeah, the Navamsha, fate and destiny. And there is something remarkable going on here on that day. So in the D1, Mars, transiting Mars. Now remember, Mars is the 8th lord and the chart ruler, was in the first house. And what was really interesting, remember that Chiron over here, which deals with the wounded healer? Transiting, so in Martin Luther King's chart, natal Chiron, the wound, is at 12 degrees, 33 minutes. On that day, Mars, which represents weapons, gunfire, knives, all that stuff, was at 12 degrees 37, was at 12 degrees 28 minutes. It was exact. That's what, it's a perfection. I call that a perfection. Whenever a planet is a degree or so or less with another conjoined, I call it a perfection. And it doesn't get pretty much more exact than that. That would be a matter of minutes. Yeah? It's a matter of minutes. Mars at 12 degrees 28 minutes conjunct natal Chiron, the wound in the body, at 12 degrees 37 minutes. That alone will be enough to trigger, but there's more. So there it is there. If we go round, if we look at the 6th house, yeah, the 6th house of enemies. So first of all, I should also say Jupiter and Pluto were with natal Neptune. Remember, Neptune is that great dissolver. Pluto represents the 8th house on his own, and Jupiter was retrograde. Yeah, retrograde. So there was something karmic going on. Anyway, so the 6th house, you had transiting Uranus and Ketu, snip, snip, in the 6th house of enemies. But what's Uranus? Sudden shocks and surprises, things that come out of the blue, traumas. Ketu is snip, snip. And they were together in the same house. And at that time, the rising sign at that time was Virgo. Virgo. And Virgo is the natural ruler of the 6th house, which was Dr. King's 6th house. So literally Virgo was rising, and who rules Virgo? Mercury. Remember that. Mercury rules Virgo. So Mercury can also be a tricky planet for Aries as well, because it rules the 3rd house of communication, which is great communication, but it rules the 6th house of enemies. So we need to see where Mercury went on that day, where he was on that day. But there's more. If we look here, Neptune, the great dissolver, by transit is with Ketu. So do you see? There is this combination again between Snip Snip and the Great Dissolver, but this time they're here in the 5th house. Look here. Snip Snip is with Neptune. Wow. And they're in the 8th house. Sorry, not the 5th house. They're in the 8th house in Scorpio. Sex, death, and rock and roll. Yeah? Sudden shocks and surprises. Wow. But the most remarkable thing of all is when we look at the 12th house of loss. And if we look here, there, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 planets in the 12th house of loss on that day. Now, they would have had to pile up, of course, over time. But if we look here, we've got Venus, Mercury, the Sun, Saturn, Rahu, and Chiron with natal Uranus, which is, like I said, sudden shocks and surprises. And transiting Uranus is with snip, snip, transiting snip, snip in the 6th house, aspecting the 12th. This is all aspecting each other. So we can see here something was bound to happen. Something sudden and shocking was bound to happen, and it was being shown in the astrology. And sadly, Dr. King was shot. Also as well, transiting Venus and Mercury were in Purva Bhadrapada, and so was his, let's just see as well, I think his natal Uranus. Yeah, his natal Uranus is also in Uttara Bhadrapada. So that means that Venus and Mercury were in the front legs of the funeral cot. Natal Uranus was in the back legs of the funeral cot. So it's all being activated. The funeral cot was ready. And then the sun was there, which is what represents what? The vitality was in Revati, which is shepherd to the gods. Yeah, Revati, Pushyan is the deity associated here, which is the celestial, which is the waters, the shepherd of the gods. Isn't that interesting? And Saturn was here with Rahu, Saturn's karma. So it's almost like the life was going to be shepherded. His soul was going to be shepherded to the gods. So there's that. But when we look in the Navamsha, it's even more remarkable because the same thing is happening, but just flipped the other way. Martin Luther King is a Libra ascendant in his Navamsha. So it means all of the houses, because if we count from Aries to Libra, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, opposite. So he's a Aries ascendant here, Libra here. So the whole chart flips. So this thing just says the same thing, but just from the other way. So if we look here, we now have Venus, Mercury, Sun, Saturn, Rahu, and Chiron in his 6th house of enemies. And now Uranus and Ketu, snip, snip, is in his 12th house of endings. And then if we look here, his Neptune is still in Scorpio, but it becomes the 2nd house. But guess what? The 2nd house and the 7th house are known as marker houses, which means death inflicting. So we will see here that he had the great dissolver Neptune in the 2nd house of his D9 in a death inflicting place. And then when we look in his 7th house, who is sitting there by transit? Mars with Saturn, and his Saturn is debilitated in Aries in that chart, but transiting Mars is there. The 7th house is a marker house as well. It's a death inflicting house. So it's like, oh my goodness, everything was lining up. And it's also a public house as well. It deals with public enemies. Also as well, his moon, transiting moon in both charts, was in the nakshatra of Ardra, which means what? The teardrop. The public wept, the public cried. Over 100,000 people came to his funeral, which was something like 2 or 3 days later. But Ardra, like I said, is what? The most destructive part of the sky. Most destructive part of the sky. And it would have also been creating this opposition with his natal Neptune as well. I mean, his natal Saturn as well. And Sun and Moon, the Moon and Saturn are not friends. So when we look here, it was all piling up. It was all piling up. But just on a lighter note, in 1964, Dr. King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize at the age of 35. Can you believe it? Remember, his first house is in Ashwini, which is about speed. Yeah, he got there early. And because of his speech, that he gave, his I Had a Dream speech, which he gave in 1963 at the Lincoln Memorial, and 250,000 people turned up. So we can see this is a huge impact that Dr. King had on many people's lives. And when he won that Nobel Peace Prize, he was in his Mercury-Mars Mahadasha. Now remember, Mars is what? The chart ruler. And it goes to his second house of speech. So he was what? Look, given this wonderful, incredible prize when he was in the Mahadasha sequence of Mercury, which is the lord of his third house and his sixth house, speech, communication, wanting to heal, sits in his 10th house of prominence and career, giving those great results, while Mars was driving the car. Mars is the chart ruler and is natally in the house of speech. Great prominence because of his speech. He won a Nobel Peace Prize. So isn't that extraordinary? So I've slightly run over with my video here, but I thought Dr. King merited that extra time. And that just goes to show, you can see there are certain timings. And this is really what one would call, looking at this is what I would call a samskara. Everything was lined up for that day. And you know what? I think he knew it. He knew it. He'd realized that he'd achieved so much of what he had intended to achieve. Now imagine, my goodness, if he could have avoided that bullet, or if something else. Imagine, oh God, you know what Jesse James, must have been thinking and stuff like that. If I wasn't talking to him on his balcony, blah, 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 what would have happened? But he had reached such an apotheosis of his power that he realized that if I went now, I'd be immortal. And that's really what's happened. Not that it condone, obviously not to condone what happened. It was just disgraceful. But he became immortal. And let's do a quick pull. Let's do a quick pull with some tarot to see. Let's ask, because remember these videos are private for a reason. Let's see if the government was involved in any way with his killing. Let me just pause the video and I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. I'll just cut those two bits together. Anyway, so was the government involved in Martin Luther King's card wanted to drop? Look at that. I said, was the government involved in Martin Luther King's death? So look, here there was some great tumult. There was some planning and discussion about what to do with this man. Yeah? You can see here it's partisan. There's different arguments. So let's just say that symbolizes the reading, particularly as that card fell out. So there were a lot of people. Now, it may not necessarily have been government, but there were, let's just say, his enemies were in great discussion about what to do with him. What to do with Martin Luther King. Wow. Oh, look, split the deck. Look at that. Sorrow. Let's just put that together. All right. Now I'm going to pick 5 cards. So, Spirit, what can you tell us about Dr. King? Who was involved in his death? Clearly, there was a lot of planning and wrangling about what to do with him because he caused a stir. What can you tell us about who was involved with his death? Let's see. Who was involved in the planning and the execution of his death? Let's see. And if the Hierophant turns up, everyone, if the Hierophant turns up, let me just show my cards here. The Hierophant turns up, and we know that that is definitely a connection with government in some shape or form, or some kind of patriarchy, or some kind of, if we also as well, if we get the Emperor as well, that can mean patriarchy. It could even mean things like the Ku Klux Klan, stuff like that. Let's have a look. Last card, Spirit. All right, this one. All right, there we go. And let's just move the cards this way, and I'm going to just turn them over. Let's have a little look and see. Wagwan. All right, so who is responsible? It was a difficult decision. They realized that it would be burdensome to do this. It would be a lot of hard work. But they wanted to move forward with their plans in a dynamic way to put an end, to put Dr. King to bed for good. And it's the Hermit. Now it does suggest that it was a lone person. May not have been the government. That would suggest it was a lone person. The Hermit works on his own. Yeah, that's a loner. Someone who did their research and stuff like that. So The person agonized over their decision, as you can imagine, as they would, but they saw it as a burden. It was a burden that they had to carry. So it seems to me maybe they were commissioned by someone and they were in two minds about it, and they saw it as some kind of a heavy burden, because look, this has come as the obstacle card. But whoever the patron was, they wanted to move forward. Look, this is the Chariot, moving forward with force and power in a dynamic way. So whoever made up their mind, they were like, this guy, he's got to go. Yeah, we need to put what? Martin Luther King to bed forever. Yeah, because this is about reflection, meditations, taking a step back, taking a rest, trying to recover or recuperate. This is an enforced rest. This could be a health episode, a shock. It can even represent death or the sleep from which one never awakes. And here we have another major arcana card as well, which is about deep reflection. Yeah, this was someone, it would suggest there was someone very determined who planned this, but planned it in secrecy. So we may never know. We may never know, particularly as well when Neptune is in the 8th house. That can deal with murder and stuff like that. And sometimes we never really find out. The guy confessed, obviously, to the killing. So someone did pay for the crime, so to speak, but he recanted his confession. And the family wanted to reopen the case. So there must have been something dynamic and compelling enough for them to want to reopen the case. But we can see here there was much wrangling behind the scenes because Dr. King was changing society so much. You can almost imagine this is the chattering classes, or imagine like clan members or people in government, people who just didn't want the civil rights movement to flourish and happen. You know, they were very, very worried about that. So it wouldn't surprise me if a lone person from that group who maybe had the money and the desire, I think they commissioned someone to do it. It could have been the James guy, it could have been someone else. It was said that their second shot was heard on the day, but there we are. But it suggests it wasn't necessarily government per se, but and particularly as well, we need to also understand that John F. Kennedy was actually very supportive of Dr. King and was himself assassinated as well. So it's probably not, certainly not from that cabinet anyway. They were, Kennedy was very much in support of Dr. King. So it looks like it was a lone, dark money, perhaps, person or some organization that is somehow isolated, stepped back. They convened and planned for the execution of Dr. King. So it's sad that it ended up that way, but what an amazing character, what a gift to the world, and what a legacy. So I hope you really enjoyed that video. When you've seen the video, please leave comments below. Oh, look at that, at the base of the deck, see? It's the devil. Someone evil was involved in his death. Leave comments below of what videos you may want me to do next. I do have a big list, but also as well, let me know what you'd like me to do as an in-depth, and hopefully I'll get back to uploading again. I normally do it on Mondays, don't I? So yeah, all being well, there'll be a next video next Monday, and I will see you on the next one. And if you are watching this as well, my live tonight is on Stacey Abrams. Yeah, so you can watch either one, however you want to do it. All right, that's enough for me. I hope you've enjoyed that video, and what a legacy of Dr. King. You know, he really did change the world. All right, thank you.